After all these years, VeggieTales is finally gonna be on national TV!
I know! It is so very exciting!
So when are we gonna film the pilot? Come on, I've got ants in my pants! You mean that metaphorically, don't you? Let's just say that these pants are dry clean only and I don't have enough money to get them cleaned. Oh, well, good for you.
Big Idea's never had this kind of opportunity before, so I know that we can't blow it when we finally—
Just a moment! Wait! Stop talking! Excuse me, but I have an announcement. Ahem. Because of the high standards that NBC tries to adhere to, and as a result of the disastrous screening of one of your previous episodes, management has decided to adhere to a more secular tone for your series. Many styles were screened and we chose one based around overall marketability and overall silliness. Thank you. So what are you saying? I'm saying that NBC won't let us talk about God on our show. They what? That's the whole point of the show! Yes, I said the same thing, but they just wouldn't listen. Well then what's the point of going on? If the first ever Christian children's show featuring an all-vegetable cast is not allowed to talk about Christian things, then it feels like we're wasting our time. Why even bother? You know, this could influence our DVD sales. Well, it's what the network wants. Why bother to complain? God remains a God, some things we can't control.
I got a bad feeling about this.
You and me both.
I have a long history with VeggieTales, and if you've been with my content for a long time, I'm sure you know that full well. If not, well then I'm not really gonna explain it here. There are so many other videos on this channel that would do a much better job. Honestly, it'd just be a bit redundant to go through the whole thing again, so I won't. Ha! But today we're gonna talk about the show once again, but this time in a very different way. We're not gonna be talking about the mainline direct-to-video series, nor the revival series, or that Netflix series that came in between. This time we're gonna talk about VeggieTales' seldom talked about and short-lived Cubo series. For those who don't know, Cubo was NBC's Saturday morning cartoon block, and they had a bunch of shows like, yeah, I didn't really watch Cubo very much in case you can't tell. But yes, they decided to take VeggieTales, the most popular Christian children's show of all time next to Adventures in Odyssey, and take the content from the DVDs onto TV. Sort of. The transfer did not go very well. It was a very rocky process with mixed results. So now let's get into Versus the Network number 202, what happens when you and the network just aren't a good fit. We're gonna have to go way back on this one, like way back to the early 1990s. Phil Vischer and Mike Naraki had an idea to make a Christian children's show starring vegetables. What a concept, right? They tried pitching their show to different networks like Nickelodeon, but that wasn't really a good fit because CG technology wasn't really there. At least not enough to make a full-on animated series. After these pitches fell through, they decided to make the show themselves. This involved making the production of the entire first episode in Phil's basement, as well as pulling several brutal all-nighters. When trying to get their episode distributed, they were turned down by places like Walmart because it had Christian values. Having their product there would apparently alienate a lot of their target demographics, so VeggieTales was outright rejected. It's possible that they would have been let in if they cut the stuff out, but that's not what VeggieTales was meant for, not at all. So Phil and Mike stood their ground and decided to release the episodes via mail order, and then little by little their company, Big Idea Productions, began to grow, and grow, and grow, and then Jonah came out and nearly destroyed everything, and then grow, and grow, and grow, and eventually Cubo caught wind of their show and decided that they wanted to air VeggieTales on their network. But there was one little catch. There was this thing in VeggieTales that they didn't like. They didn't want God to be in any of the episodes that they aired, which was kind of a problem at this point. See, when Phil Vischer and Mike Naraki were pitching VeggieTales to Nickelodeon, none of the episodes had been made. Maybe a couple had been written and there were some concepts thrown around, but nothing was outright finished, not even close. But by the time Cubo got their sweaty little hands on VeggieTales, not so much. But now that Phil Vischer was no longer the head of the production company, Big Idea Productions, they decided to go ahead and accept the deal, even though this was going to create a lot of problems. problems. So first off, something I didn't mention is that Cubo didn't exist at the time that VeggieTales ended up making this deal. They were just starting to exist. VeggieTales was actually the first show to ever air on Cubo. Even so, they were still dealing with a big company, NBC, which is, yeah, it's kind of a mega corporation, so you don't want to push their buttons. Which means that in order for VeggieTales to be on TV, they would have to do whatever the network said, which meant that they had to splice out every little mention of God that they possibly could and throw it aside. So VeggieTales did end up becoming a morality show in the end, even if it's not the original show, but still the point stands. This is exactly what Phil Vischer and Mike Naraki were trying to avoid. One of their key points was to keep God in the show as much as possible. Phil Vischer goes on about this at length in his autobiography, Me, Myself, and Bob, which, by the way, even if you're not a Christian or not a VeggieTales fan, I highly recommend you read it. It's a great story of a self-made man that had it all and then lost it all through his sheer inexperience and overexcitement. Honestly, I think it's a great book, regardless of your religious beliefs. But anyways, that wasn't the only thing that they had to change for NBC/Cubo. The episodes were also too long. The earlier ones were okay, like God Wants Me to Forgive Them and Are You My Neighbor. They were at decent lengths. The short running time meant that they were mostly fine. Once they cut out all the God stuff, they were basically good. But then when you get to the later episodes, like Lyle the Kindly Viking or Esther the Girl Who Became Queen, not so much. They were quite long, so a lot of them had to get cut. This involved some very bad editing on the part of whoever put these together. There are just shots that get cut together with no transition or context or anything, and it's kinda jarring. If you haven't seen the original episodes, you might not really know what's going on sometimes. Occasionally, they'll be okay, but in episodes like Larry Boy and the Rumor Weed, it gets really bad. They also cut out the countertop segments as well, partially because of the Bible verse thing and also the fact that, well, they talk about God the most there, at least in terms of percentage-wise when it comes to the runtime of the overall segments. Instead, we got Bob and Larry at Bob's house talking about whatever story they're gonna tell today. Jimmy comes by as their mailman singing a very strange song. He gives them a letter that has this very generic, very happy-go-lucky, wholesome problem, but then one of the VeggieTales characters that are not Bob, Larry, or Jimmy come in and try to fix the problem themselves. Only thing is, they stink at it. Which means it's up to Bob and Larry to tell their story of the week and then solve this kid's pretty inconsequential problem. I mean, let's be real. You don't want to share a cupcake with your sister. I will say, though, that these are still pretty funny and they keep true to the original spirit of the show. But again, we know why they're here. In fact, in some of the earlier episodes, you can very clearly see that Bob's mouth movements say God made you special and he loves you very much. You know, the main catchphrase and tagline of the show? But I guess they didn't get the memo that they can't say that, even though they had to cut out all the God stuff anyways. So instead, they just dub him over by saying,
"Hey kids, thanks for coming to my house today. We'll see you next week."
So, was VeggieTales on Cubo a bad show? Well, no, of course not. It's still VeggieTales. It's still the show that all the little children who grew up in Christian households came to know and love. But the problem is, regardless as to who was in charge of this decision, they really let the integrity of the show go. The entire point was to make sure that kids in a Christian household learned about God and his values. But now that it was on Cubo, yeah, it was reaching more people, but it wasn't the same. It didn't have the same mission statement anymore, and honestly, speaking as someone here in the year 2022, we should have seen this coming as a very big warning sign that whoever was in charge of VeggieTales at this time was more than willing to let the Christian stuff fall to the wayside. As the show went on, we would see more and more episodes getting secularized. In other words, they'd be just basic morality tales that would end up teaching the same lessons that Cubo did, with barely any connection to what made the show work in the first place, at least on a lesson level. And then later on after that, it got even worse with this. At this point, the show became 90% secular. Once again, it decided to go against its original purpose to reach a wide audience. And do you really think that was a good idea? Well, of course for NBC, yeah, it was a great idea. It made lots of money. But for Big Idea? No, this was a complete betrayal for everything they stood for. Think about it. Do you think that the Phil Vischer and Mike Naraki, back when they were making the first episode, Where's God When I'm So Scared, would be proud of the decision that was made to put VeggieTales on TV? Would they really be satisfied with cutting out every single mention of God that was possible in order to reach a wider audience? Chances are they wouldn't be. I know I wouldn't be. So it's kinda hard to find who's at fault here because Big Idea knew what they were doing and walked right into it, but at this point they weren't really the same company, at least not exactly, because they had a bunch of parent organizations telling them what to do. The people at Big Idea themselves still cared, but their overlords not so much. NBC can't be fully blamed either because they're NBC. They were just trying to look out for the bottom line. You know, that sweet, sweet profit. No, I'm not talking about Jonah, I'm talking about this profit. Cash money. Given the fact that NBC is a giant multinational corporation, obviously, money is their top priority. If kids happen to learn something out of it, great. But they want money above all else. And VeggieTales was a growing brand and they wanted a part of it. They just didn't end up being a good match. So how can you, the aspiring creator, learn from this? Honestly, just make sure you know who you're pitching to, kinda like what we learned last week with Dilbert. Dilbert ended up going to UPN, which turned out to be a very bad idea because UPN didn't know what it was doing. It put Dilbert next to one of the worst shows ever, fired everybody on the show because they were racist, and their promotion for the show was kinda screwy. So this is yet another example of make sure you know who you're doing business with. Do you really think that your show would be right on this network, or streaming service, or whatever it is? There's that old story of Adventure Time being pitched to Nickelodeon and then they turned it down, only for them to go to Cartoon Network and become a gigantic phenomenon. I see that as a good thing because Adventure Time wouldn't have become the show that everybody fell in love with if they went to Nickelodeon, because Nickelodeon is very, very different from Cartoon Network. They have different goals, different standards and practices, different owners. You may look at some TV networks and think that because they have similar programming, they're automatically the same. But it's not true. They're not just skins that are slapped on with different kinds of programming. No, no, no. They really are different entities, so if you're gonna sell your intellectual property, make sure it's going to the right one, or else, just like VeggieTales, your vision's gonna be compromised, and irreparably so. Well, folks, thanks for watching the video. What'd you guys think? Do you like the Cubo episodes of VeggieTales better than the originals? I don't think you do. Maybe someday we'll get into 3-2-1 Penguins, I don't know. Remember, we don't take requests, but it is on the Patreon raffle list, so it could happen. Speaking of which, comment below and let us know because we're always excited to hear what you guys have to say. And real quick, I'd like to thank our Patreon executive producers, Lee Fraser, Valkyria, Whoop-Doo, Michaela Bellamy, MD the Dude, Blackjack, Nightingale Wednesday Nightmare, Unkale, and Manny Paredes. If you too would like your name read at the end of every Media Mementos video, then consider donating to our Patreon, which has a link in the description below. And now, folks, it's time for the comment of the day. Today's comment of the day goes to CJB Studios. At last, the long-awaited series of stuff getting screwed by the network has finally returned. This is actually one of my favorite series on the channel, and I've been dying for you guys to bring it back again. I cannot wait to check out all 6 episodes of Versus the Network Season 2. Keep up the good work, Trevor and Billy. There's not much you can really say except thank you. We're really happy to bring Versus the Network back. It's gonna be a yearly thing now in the month of July, so yeah, this is something that you all can look forward to. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you guys next time!
So, how was it?
Let's not talk about it till we get the checks. In some ways, I can't help but feel that this was a gigantic mistake. I agree with, what's your name again? I agree with, this kind of feels like a betrayal to our overall goal.
Yeah, we know. We just watched a 10-minute video that explained all that.
What do you mean?
The review? The one that came in between all this time that we've had on camera?
Review? What review? Nobody told me that this was a review! Ah, man, and look at me! I didn't even put on my best tie! I didn't know you wore a tie. I don't, but I found one on the street the other day, and I didn't want it to go to waste. Well, at least we can all find some comfort in the fact that this is the lowest that Big Idea is ever gonna sink. Right, guys?